If you own a home worth £1 million or more, you need to listen very carefully to what I'm about to share, because right now, behind closed doors in Westminster, inside policy papers circulating through the Treasury, and across reports from respected economic institutions, a serious conversation is taking place that could completely transform how property is taxed in this country. And I'm not talking about a minor tweak to council tax bans. I'm talking about a structural overhaul that could see owners of high-value homes facing annual bills they never saw coming. What makes this even more startling is that most homeowners have absolutely no idea this discussion is gathering momentum. Before we go any further, if you care about UK property, the economy, and the policies that could directly affect your wealth, make sure you're paying attention. Because what's being discussed right now has the potential to reshape home ownership in Britain for a generation. So why are £1 million homes suddenly in the spotlight? The answer lies in one word: inequality. Over the past 2 decades, property values, especially in London and the South East, have exploded. Meanwhile, wage growth has been sluggish, living costs have surged, and younger generations increasingly feel locked out of home ownership entirely. A modest terraced home in parts of London now carries a 7-figure price tag. That reality has fundamentally changed the political conversation. At the center of this debate is the fact that our current council tax system is still based on property valuations from 1991. Yes, 1991. Over 30 years ago. Homes are still placed into bands according to what they were worth back then. That means a property that was valued at £120,000 in 1991 but is now worth £1.5 million may still sit in a band that doesn't remotely reflect its real market value. Critics argue this has created deep distortions in who pays what, with expensive homes effectively undertaxed relative to their true worth. Think tanks such as the Resolution Foundation have openly proposed replacing council tax with what's being described as a proportional property tax. Instead of bands, homeowners would pay a percentage of their property's current market value each year. The rate most frequently mentioned in policy discussions hovers around 0.5% annually. That might sound small at first glance, but let's break it down. On a £1 million property, that's £5,000 every single year. On a £2 million home, £10,000 annually. Compare that to current council tax bills, which even at the top bands rarely exceed around £3,000 per year. That difference is enormous. And here's where it gets complicated. Not every owner of a £1 million home feels wealthy in terms of income. Many bought decades ago when prices were dramatically lower. Retirees who purchased their homes in the 1980s or 1990s may now find themselves asset-rich but cash-poor. Their property value rose because of market forces, not because their income skyrocketed. Under a proportional system, they could suddenly face thousands of pounds in additional annual costs without having any new cash flow to support it. That raises a deeply emotional question. Are we prepared to see long-term residents forced to sell homes they've lived in for 40 years because of a tax shift? The pensioner who watched their neighborhood gentrify around them could face a bill that fundamentally alters their retirement plans. That's not theoretical. In countries where property taxes are significantly higher, generational residents have sometimes been displaced because they couldn't afford the carrying costs. Supporters argue Britain is actually an outlier. In the United States, property taxes frequently exceed 1% of market value annually. In Switzerland, property wealth is taxed more consistently. The Netherlands includes property within broader wealth tax frameworks. From that perspective, advocates say the UK has been unusually light on taxing property wealth compared to work income. They argue someone earning £50,000 per year often faces a heavier effective tax burden than someone sitting on several million pounds in housing equity. But critics push back hard. They say this doesn't solve the housing crisis, it doesn't build more homes, it doesn't reform planning laws, it simply raises revenue from a politically convenient target. And that's the other driving force behind this conversation. Money. The UK faces intense fiscal pressure. Pandemic spending ballooned public debt. The NHS requires substantial long-term funding increases. Infrastructure upgrades are overdue. Politicians are desperate for revenue sources that don't involve directly raising income tax or VAT. Property, unlike income or corporate profits, cannot move offshore. It cannot hide. It is visible, fixed, and relatively easy to tax. Estimates suggest that a full proportional property tax replacing council tax could raise tens of billions more per year. Even if applied only to homes worth over £1 million, it could generate several billion annually while affecting a relatively small percentage of households. Politically, that can be framed as targeting the wealthiest few percent while funding public services. But there's a risk many homeowners are starting to whisper about. If the threshold begins at £1 million, how long before it shifts downward? History shows us that once a tax infrastructure exists, expanding it is far easier than introducing it. Income tax was once intended for only the highest earners. Over time, thresholds adjusted, rates evolved. A £1 million cutoff might feel distant today, but in parts of London, perfectly ordinary three-bedroom family homes already cross that line. Regional inequality adds fuel to the fire. £1 million in central London might buy a modest flat. In other parts of the country, it buys a large detached house or even a small estate. A single national threshold would disproportionately affect the southeast. Supporters argue that's simply where property wealth is concentrated. Opponents say it deepens the north-south divide. There are also technical challenges. How do you accurately revalue millions of properties on a regular basis? The last serious attempt at large-scale revaluation was politically explosive. Homeowners saw potential bills doubling or tripling. Governments retreated. Any new system would require constant updates, likely through automated valuation models. That opens the door to disputes, appeals, and legal challenges. And make no mistake, legal battles would come. Property rights are culturally and legally embedded in Britain. Substantially increasing the annual cost of owning your home could spark court challenges around fairness, human rights protections, and proportionality. Even the uncertainty during implementation could freeze parts of the housing market. Buyers hesitate when future tax rules are unclear. Sellers may rush transactions before changes take effect. There's also the mortgage market to consider. Lenders assess affordability based on ongoing costs. If annual property tax rises significantly, that reduces how much banks are willing to lend. That could dampen demand in the very segment policymakers target, potentially pushing prices downward at the top end. Some analysts suggest high-end values could fall 10 to 15% if a significant annual tax is introduced, as buyers factor in those future costs. Would that improve affordability? Possibly at the margins. But it would also reduce paper wealth for existing owners, impacting spending and broader economic confidence. London's role as a global property hub could also shift. International investors already face higher stamp duty surcharges. Adding an annual proportional tax might make other cities more attractive for global capital. There are mitigation proposals on the table, deferred payment schemes allowing pensioners to roll up the tax until sale, caps on annual increases, targeted exemptions, but every exemption reduces revenue and adds complexity. What begins as a simple proportional system can quickly become tangled in conditions and carve-outs. What's truly remarkable is how far this conversation has moved in a short period of time. A decade ago, the idea of significantly raising property taxation on high-value homes would have been politically toxic. Today, it is openly debated in policy circles. Polling suggests younger voters, frustrated by being priced out of ownership, are more receptive to the idea. At its heart, this debate forces a deeper question. What is property supposed to represent in Britain? Is it primarily shelter, or has it become our dominant wealth-building engine? For decades, rising house prices created vast untaxed gains for homeowners. That created security for some and exclusion for others. Now policymakers are questioning whether that balance is sustainable. If you currently own a home worth over £1 million, panic is not the answer. But awareness absolutely is. Understanding that the tax environment which has favored property wealth for decades may not remain untouched is crucial. Conversations with financial advisors, reassessing long-term affordability, and stress testing your finances against higher annual costs may become necessary steps. If this story matters to you, stay informed, stay engaged, and keep watching the policies coming out of Westminster, because what's being drafted today could redefine the economics of homeownership tomorrow, and decisions made in committee room